This is a very, very special honor, a special moment for me. It's 14 years and 2 weeks since Hong Kong returned to China. It's 44 years, 2 weeks, and 1 day since I got off an airplane in Kai Tak Airport, a young Canadian, and started my career in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has been so much a part of my life over all of these years. To be here and be able to celebrate with all of you this very, very significant reform is a special and unforgettable experience. So I wish to express my congratulations to our Chief Executive, our Secretary for Education and Manpower, and I feel so delighted that so many ministerial representatives from more than, I think, 14 countries and regions have come to support Hong Kong at this time. Now, I have a paper here of 27 pages. You'll be relieved to know I'm not going to read it. I hope I'll be able to say enough in the half an hour allotted to me that you will like to read it. I think it will be available. I'll just try to bring out some main points out of the paper to share with you today. I just have to figure out how to move the PowerPoint. Perhaps someone could tell me how I would move that. Oh, it's showing here, yes. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I'm not very good with technology. So this moves the PowerPoint down here? Okay. So I have just put some of the key points here into my PowerPoint to share with you this morning. It's truly a remarkable set of reforms that have been unfolded in these 14 years since 1997. I was part of this for the first 5 years. I sat on the Education Commission and enjoyed very much participating in that process and was very, very impressed with the public consultation that took place at all stages of the unfolding of these reforms. And I'm not going to focus so much today on the reforms themselves as the challenge for implementation. I worked in London long years ago with a very distinguished professor of comparative education, Brian Holmes. He made a comment which has always stayed with me. That is, it's one thing to design and unfold reforms. It's another thing to implement them. And so what I want to think about today and share with you are some thoughts on the cultural and spiritual and historical resources which Hong Kong has in her students, their parents, the teachers, those people who will be implementing the reforms in the classroom. And what I want to say about that is, I think Hong Kong has really a very remarkable, I'm trying to move this, there we are, set of resources. So I've come to this from a global perspective. My comparative education work is really from historical and philosophical perspectives. And so when I thought about this structural change in Hong Kong from 6, 5, 2, 3 to 6, 3, 3, 4, to make it very simple, I thought, you know, this is really the patterns introduced to China in 1922, nearly 100 years ago, when John Dewey, the great American philosopher, visited Beijing from 1919 until 1921. So it's become a kind of global pattern. It's a set of patterns that are very, very significant for opening up space that's so important for a knowledge society. And so I thought, here's Hong Kong with a rich Chinese heritage. The majority of its people are Chinese and more deeply connected to the Chinese mainland since the return to Hong Kong. Very rich traditions in the Confucian and Taoist heritages of culture, thought, and education. And Hong Kong now has the opportunity to integrate into its own traditions two rather different Western traditions. One is the British. I was also very influenced by the British because Canada was once a British colony and my high school was not so different from the high schools in Hong Kong in the 1960s. This is a wonderful tradition with many rich values, and probably Hong Kong is the only society in the world that had 155 years to experience the integration of Chinese and British values. The other is the American, which have been, particularly since the Second World War, a real force for the development of progressive education around the world, the ideas of Dewey and his followers, and so on. And what I'm going to propose today is that these two Western traditions, which each have contributed greatly to education around the world, can be absorbed into and integrated with different strands of China's philosophical tradition and heritage, and that Hong Kong is the place where this can be done. So that is a kind of overview of what I will try to speak about. My paper is in 5 parts. I'll skip over the first 2 rather quickly and then try to focus a little bit on parts 3, 4, and 5. I can't resist a few personal comments from my life experience of Hong Kong that goes back to 1967. I'll begin with that. And then I want to simply outline the major achievements of the reform. We have 3 days to have them introduced. We've already had an overview, but I think they are so significant because they all link together in interesting ways. Then I want to go on to these 3 philosophical points and to suggest that British traditions of education from an early period before the Industrial Revolution harmonized very well with Song Neo-Confucianism, one of the great threads of China's educational tradition. That American educational ideas of progressivism, of learning through doing, integrate beautifully with Ming Neo-Confucianism, another rich thread of China's tradition. And that Chinese tradition and philosophy has a very rich source for creativity. Creativity is one of the things everyone is talking about. How do we create conditions where children can learn creatively and become creative thinkers and individuals? And very often in Asian societies, people look to the West. How is creativity nurtured in the West? I want to suggest China has a more radical tradition of creativity than we have in the West. And that if the reforms could be rooted in that tradition, they would really become very much embraced by the Chinese community, rather than being a kind of foreign idea that we are trying to impress on or introduce to Chinese schools and Chinese children. So let's begin with the personal perspective. I came in 1967. What a different city this was. A city of refugees, a city of factories, factories for toys, plastics, electronics, a city where most children got to go to primary school for 6 years, partly by government provision, partly by many missionary and other voluntary organizations setting up small schools, including rooftop schools. One of my friends was one of the old missionaries I worked with, had a rooftop school in Wong Tai Sin. So I remember that very, very vividly. So most children got those first few years. But many children did not go to secondary school in those days. It was very elite. There was only a few places. 12, 13, and 14-year-olds went to work in factories. And only in 1978, the year I left Hong Kong to go on with my career, the colonial government introduced compulsory education for 9 years. That was a very important move forward for Hong Kong. I just want to tell you the story of one family. I lived in Diamond Hill. It was one of the few not yet reconstructed shack towns where the refugees lived. My cousin had a school there. And there was a family of 5 children. And they were all children in my cousin's school. Not one of them expected to go on to secondary, let alone university. But by a wonderful chance and opportunity, the father, who was an orderly in a hospital, got a job in Canada. He moved to Toronto to take care of an elderly man with Alzheimer's, and he brought his family over. And this was the 1970s, about 1971, 72. And guess what? 4 of his 5 children graduated from the University of Toronto in the late 70s and early 80s and had professional careers in Canada. What incredible potential that could not be developed in the education system of those days. It just would not have happened. So I think human resources development is all about the potential of children, the potential of all children, and what we are doing to develop that potential. When I came back to Hong Kong in 1997 to be the director of the Institute of Education, it was so exciting to see all the incredible changes in the city, in the schools, in the people, and to be given this, let me tell all of you Hong Kong people, to be entrusted as a non-Chinese, but a China lover, Sinophile, more than a Sinologue maybe, with the leading an institution to educate the teachers for all the schools, from kindergarten through primary, through lower secondary. To be trusted with such a responsibility was an amazing opportunity and honor. So the first thing we did at the Institute was develop a vision, and I see one of our principals who was there, Principal Dai, who helped us with that vision. And the vision was so simple, and yet it was so meaningful, and I think it's what the whole reform is about here. Optimizing each child's potential through the shared joy of learning and teaching. 共享學教喜悅，進展赤子潛能. So 12 words in English, 12 words in Chinese. And now, in the 14 years since we developed this vision, we have a whole set of structural reforms which truly will make it possible for every child in Hong Kong to be developed. So that is the personal perspective. As I say, I don't think I need to spend time on the overview, the structure. It used to be 2 or 3 sets of exams, one for secondary school, one for Form 5, one for Form 7. Now we have only one set, the joint secondary exam at the end of Form 6. Curriculum becoming not a set of knowledge that is rigidly set out and memorized, but rather a series of learning experiences that allow children to understand and learn about their environment, about their city, about their country, and to develop basic knowledge in mathematics, language, the sciences, and so on. Language policy, I think, something of great interest. Of course, the famous phrase in Hong Kong, 三语两文, 3 spoken languages, 2 written languages. A colleague of mine who's from the mainland expressed regret that Hong Kong didn't require all children to start learning in Putonghua from grade 1. I think Hong Kong was wise to keep Cantonese, a local language. So you have modeled a language policy which is very important around the world, preserving local languages, promoting national languages, and encouraging knowledge of global languages. So we have all 3 here in Hong Kong. I'm a great admirer of the great African scholar Ali Mesrui, who wrote about that in an African context. And I think it's a great model for the world. And I believe young people have an incredible flexibility of mind that enables them to master 3 languages, although I know there are many controversies about that, whether English is neglected, whether Putonghua is treated well enough, and so on. In our vision, we made it a little bit broader. We stated in our vision, multilingualism to encourage flexibility of mind and access to the wisdom of the world's diverse cultures. And I think your language policy models that. We also have this very interesting idea, which I understand is very, very difficult to implement, making 1 history instead of 2. Instead of Chinese history and world history, Chinese history as a framework for world history. If you can do it, tell me. The world has been forcing Chinese history into its mold for too long. It's time for Chinese history to become a frame. It's even longer than most Western countries' history from which we look at world history. So very, very exciting. And of course, higher education from 3 to 4 years, much more open and integrated framework is planned so that the college students and the associate degrees will have a lot of interaction with the full degrees. So I think all of these are very, very striking and important reforms. And the fact that these could be unveiled one after another, I guess the higher education is the last one. I read the UGC's report most recently on that. But the sense of coherence in the development of these reforms is something quite wonderful. Sir Michael Barber was just saying to me, in England, we try to make people do it in a year and a half or two. Hong Kong allowed itself 14 years. And I think that was very important for the reform process.